Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into the origins and evolution of American government. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also the host of this discussion. And here he is, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Agnes, thank you very much for that introduction, and welcome to a Wednesday edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Today is the 24th day of August. It is a Wednesday in the year 2016. It is a pleasure to be with you today here on this broadcast for the Virtual Center. We, as you know, did not do a live program on yesterday, and I kind of feel obligated to explain that because it was my doing. That I'm the one that backed out of yesterday's program, and I appreciate. I emailed Agnes early in the morning and kind of asked if we could run a previous a taped program from the past, one of the archive programs, and we've had a little bit of an issue, a personal issue here over the last 3 or 4 days. A good friend and a neighbor passed away this past Saturday, and right next door to us, and we weren't that close to her. But over the months, and she's lived there for right next to us for 3 or 4 years, and was becoming a very, very good friend. I mean, the more we got to know her, the more we liked her. And so anyway, she passed away on Saturday, and we spent most of the day on Saturday involved in that. And the police and the EMTs and everybody else was over there, and it went on until close to midnight on Saturday night. And my wife and I spent a good portion of Sunday ruminating on how much we missed her and how much we liked her and that kind of thing. By the time it came to Monday to do the program here at the Virtual Center, as you know, for those of you who were with us, who were kind enough to be with us, I did do the program on Monday. I wasn't happy with it at all. I didn't feel comfortable with it. I had wonderful material. I had spent close to 5 hours putting the program together on Monday because I really was feeling very, very strongly about this Donald Trump and the hiring of Bannon and the connection with Breitbart and all of these other things. I really felt that this was very significant. But the fact of the matter is, when we got into the program, I didn't seem to be able to connect to the material, if that makes sense. And that happens. I know it happens, but in this particular case, I think I knew the reason. And so consequently, when it came time to think about doing the program yesterday, I just kind of didn't think I could do it. And but on the other hand, today's a new day, and hopefully I can try to make up for some of what I felt were deficiencies in Monday's program. And a couple of people who did hear it have been very kind and said, "Oh, it was fine. It was a good program and all that." But I wasn't satisfied with it. I just didn't feel that the stuff was connecting to me. I was saying it, but I wasn't feeling it, if that makes sense. And part of the reason was I think my feelings were I think everything that I could feel had been pretty well exhausted over the previous 36 hours or so. So anyway, it is a pleasure to be with you on this Wednesday, and I do thank you for your continued support of the Virtual Center and of the Head On Radio Network. As we move further along in this campaign, I just appreciate the importance of the kind of programming that Bob Kincaid and his folks have here on the Head On Radio Network, and how important it is. And I know that, at some point in time, somebody is going to ride in on a white horse, on a white stallion with a check. But that hasn't happened yet, and hopefully it will. But I keep hanging in there, hanging on that hope. And at the same time, I appreciate more and more and more those of you who keep this program and this network on the air. I credit you for it. I thank you for it. I respect you for it, and I'll always be grateful to you for it. And I want all of you to know that. We would love to hear. I want to begin today's program by going back a little bit to Monday's program to a couple of issues. The first one is the issue of the Article 5 convention and the number of states. I just have one additional thought or issue that I thought I would share with you on that particular issue. And then I wanted to touch a little bit on some of the Donald Trump issues associated with his campaign and efforts to try to explain it and those kinds of things. And then I'd like to go into a topic that we did here at the Virtual Center several months ago. It's probably well over a year ago. Could be longer than that. And this is Kohlberg's Stages of Moral Development. And let me briefly explain right now at the beginning, before I even give you the phone number or anything else, what prompted this. Many of you may have picked up on the national news yesterday that there's quite a bit of concern about the escalation in drug prices of late. And the issue that's really getting most of the play at the national level is this allergy drug called EpiPen. And it's a drug manufactured. It's an injection for allergies, severe allergies. We're talking about people that have severe, where it's not just an inconvenience, but that the allergy is very serious, and especially in young children. And it's an injection. And the drug is manufactured by Mylan Pharmaceuticals. And it just so happens that the CEO for Mylan Pharmaceuticals is the daughter of Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia. So this has a little bit of a close-to-home flavor to me. That was the first thing that I picked up was the fact, who's the manufacturer of this drug? The fact of the matter is that EpiPen, the drug, has been on the market for quite a while. And when Mylan Pharmaceuticals, Mylan Laboratories, purchased the drug in 2007, which was 9 years ago, the cost of the drug was $57 for two injections, if you will. I don't know exactly how frequently the injections must be administered, but it comes in a 2-pack. And I don't know how much each half of the 2-pack constitutes. What I do know is that in 2007, when Mylan purchased the rights to this drug, the cost on the market was $57. Now it's in the neighborhood of $600. And obviously many people can't afford it. And that made me think back to the issue of moral development discussed some years ago by Lawrence Kohlberg and his experiments on the stages of moral development. And I thought, this is really important. It's about time that we take a little bit of time here in the Virtual Center and start to look at some of these issues of morality and the extent to which the intellectual aspects of morality, the ability to reason and think critically, plays such a role in the issue of reaching moral decisions. And it's a fairly complex issue. It's one that we dealt with, although I don't think we dealt with it in too much detail, some months ago. And I know it well over a year ago. It could have been more than a year. It could have been 2 years ago. But it's an important issue. And I was chatting last evening with a friend and mentioned that I thought, that this would probably be a good issue to introduce here at the Virtual Center today. So I'd like to get into that once we get into today's program. But first of all, I'd like to take care of the household operations, which is our phone number, which is the way that you can get on the air. And especially if you have comments related to the campaign or to the Trump campaign or to the Hillary Clinton campaign or however you might choose to approach it, we would love to hear from you. And we have a phone number for that purpose. The phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. If you'd like to share your thoughts, but would prefer to do it privately in an email, you can drop an email to me. I would love to hear from you. And my email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, OBRIEN 906@gmail.com. And finally, I call your attention to our Facebook page. And I know a number of you are looking at it and are visiting it because every single day I receive one or two new people are visiting our Facebook page, and a number of people will make comments on particular postings there. And I might say that I did post a link on the Facebook page earlier today, and it relates to I didn't actually copy it down. I thought it was so fresh in my mind I'd remember it, but that was 3 hours ago. So, and a lot's gone through my mind in the last 3 hours, believe me. But I do believe it was related to, if I'm not mistaken, Ann Coulter. I started to write that, and I'm not, to tell you the truth, I can't remember whether I completed it or not. But anyway, Ann Coulter appeared on CNBC. And made the comment that about this election, and made the comment that if Hillary Clinton wins this election, given what she plans to do, wants to do with immigration and opening in the borders and the rest of it, then Ann Coulter's prediction is that no Republican will ever again have a chance to win an election. And her argument is radio talk shows and Fox News and all of these opinionated conservative opinion outlets would be out of business. Because the fact of the matter is Hillary Clinton would introduce somewhere between 30 and 40 million new voters, Hispanic voters and foreign voters, into the electoral process to the point that Republicans would never again win an election in this system. And it's an interesting concept on her part. But I think there's something else to be said about this. And whatever you might think about Ann Coulter, and the only thing I can say as far as what I think about Ann Coulter is I try to do it as infrequently as I can. But the fact of the matter is the way she looks at the election in this issue, in other words, the fact that she has a position that if Hillary Clinton wins, we'll never win another election again, suggests to me how she envisions a Trump victory. And it is my feeling that her support for Donald Trump and her longstanding support for Breitbart and for Steve Bannon, the new campaign manager of Donald Trump's campaign, suggests that this is their goal also, and that is to build a movement that would go well beyond this particular election. That, in essence, what she supports is the kind of either-or, black or white world based on ideology, which would in fact mean, once and for all, the end of the republic and the election system which supports it, as times here at the Virtual Center, and looking at the call for the Constitutional Convention and looked at several Federalist Papers in the process. And one of the things that we know is that the intent of the founders was to build a republic based on a process of popular participation in government, with elected representatives in frequent communication with their constituents. And the thinking was, on the part of the founders, is that the constituents would have an opportunity to have an instrumental, effective degree of input into the decisions made at the national level. And the major concern, and this was Madison's major concern, of course, was the threat of factions and the extent to which the idea of factions, one-issue groups, would so divide the system and create hostility within the system that it could potentially pose problems. And Madison's solution to that was to encourage the creation of additional factions on the assumptions that if there was enough of them and if they were all active and operative, then the likelihood of one particular faction, and of course the faction that most concerned Madison was the majority faction, would never be able to get control. The ideal to Madison, Hamilton, and the others was a system which would be based on negotiation, on give and take, on discussion, on compromise, and on moderation. A system that would focus upon what people had in common, what brought people together, not what divided them. And that was the model. And Madison's Federalist Number 10, we did so much with, talked about a process where through a series of increasingly escalating elections, localism would be bled out or would be extracted from the political process to the point that by the time you got to the national level, you would have elected representatives from constituencies all over the nation, all of these representatives focusing principally on the public interest or the national interest, not driven or controlled by local considerations or local concerns or local power issues. And that way, what we would have would be a participatory system of Republican government which would constantly focus the attention of the most qualified people in the nation on finding common ground on the issues that divided people, and Madison acknowledged that there would always be issues dividing people. But the key factor to Madison was you don't focus so much when looking at government on the issues that divide. You look at the issues that unite and bring people together. If indeed, and I don't even think if is appropriate because I think that this is pretty definitive. I really do. When you read the literature, you read the writings of the founders themselves, there's little question in my mind except that this is the story of the Republic as the founders intended it. What I can't attest to for sure is how many of those at the convention who voted on the Constitution really understood all of this. We know that many of them did. We know that many of these people read David Hume and Montesquieu and many of the other philosophers, so-called enlightened philosophers, many of them, including Jefferson, Madison, Hamilton, and the rest of them, were very familiar with the ideas of the Scottish Enlightenment, the ideas of Francis Hutchinson and David Hume and all the rest of them. We know that. And so basically, what we know then, pretty definitively, I think, is that this is really the way that this republic as envisioned by the founders, was supposed to work. The perspective that drives Stephen K. Bannon and Breitbart, and now the Trump campaign, the perspective that drives Ann Coulter, it seems to me, is to play on the differences and silence the opposition. That ultimately it's an either-or system which will not coexist, but one ultimately will overwhelm the other. And the fact that Ann Coulter sees a Hillary Clinton victory in this November's election as sinking the prospects of the Republican Party forever, it seems to me is significant, not so much for what it says about the Trump campaign, as to what it says about the way Ann Coulter sees politics in our society. And it's very consistent with Bannon. It's very consistent with Breitbart. And now, for all practical purposes, it heads up the Republican Party in this campaign. So in a sense, I see this, and that's why it's so significant, I believe, I see this campaign as a playing out of this divisive, negative approach to campaigning where one side seeks to destroy the other. And what it involves is much more than criticizing, actually ridiculing those who would plan or advocate crossing the aisle and working with their opponents. In this view of politics, these moderates, these negotiators and compromisers, need to be gone. And the fact of the matter is, in recent years, as we know, the Republican Party has done a pretty good job in eliminating moderate Republicans, or what used to be referred to as liberal Republicans. During the Eisenhower years, the 50s and the 60s, moderate Republicans dominated the party. Now they're few and far between. I think you have a few. I think Susan Collins of Maine is one, clearly. But the fact of the matter is, those that are the most moderate are in hiding. Because right now, the wave that seems to be sweeping over and engulfing the entire Republican Party is a wave of division, not compromise and cooperation. And I think Ann Coulter's comment pretty much speaks to that. The fact that she sees a defeat for her side as a permanent one seems to me to indicate that if her side wins, it'll be a permanent defeat for the other side. Or at least she and those who agree with her will work to accomplish that. I really believe that's significant. I also believe that those people who are predicting that the Republican Party as we know it will never survive this election, because the fact of the matter is what is called Trumpism is never going to go away. Even if Trump loses the election, the movement he headed will be there. The constituency he most appealed to will be there. And the fact of the matter is, if the defeat of Donald Trump in November is by a significant margin, if it's close, then the pundits will speculate as to what was the factor or what were the determining factors that caused the loss. But if it's a close election, that's going to suggest that the debate or the conversation is going to focus on certain issues. But if the defeat of Republicans this fall is a landslide, if the Republicans not only lose the White House, but lose control of the Senate, and as far-fetched as it is, not even control of the House, but a significant portion of their majority in the House. Right now, Republicans have a significant majority in the House. I believe it's about 30 seats. Nobody expects that the defeat, however severe it might be, would enable Democrats to overcome that kind of a deficit. But some people acknowledge that they could put a real dent in that majority. The Democratic strength in the House would be enhanced significantly. And the result would be that it would be a little bit less difficult for the ideology that has dominated the Republican Party over the last several years will continue to be able to control the House without significant opposition. Plus, they will not have a Republican majority in the Senate either. So back to the point. If the defeat of Republicans this year is significant, is by a wide margin, then most of the conversation after the election is going to be on why. Who caused it? Who was most at fault? Was it Trump and the nature of the campaign he waged? Or was it the mainstream Republican Party who failed to support Trump, at least to the degree that one would have expected the party to support its standard bearer? Either way, the fact of the matter is the Republican Party's probably not going to survive this November without significant change. Chances are that if Trump loses the election, then the constituency he heads, the constituency that Stephen K. Bannon heads, which is the organization called Breitbart right now. He's taken a leave of absence through the election as executive director of Breitbart. But obviously, if Trump loses the election, Bannon will go back and become active in the management of Breitbart. And the Breitbart constituency is the Trump constituency. Obviously, the group that most avidly supports Donald Trump did not come into existence because of the campaign and the candidacy of Donald Trump. It was there before, awaiting a leader, a voice, and Trump became that voice. But the architect of the movement was Breitbart. And the fact of the matter is Bannon took it over in 2012. So in this short period of time, Breitbart and Bannon together have been able to build a constituency based on anger and frustration and racism and bigotry and hatred. And the irony is, when a candidate emerged to give voice to that kind of a constituency, the entire group followed the Donald as if he were the Pied Piper. And one of the things we've talked about of late is whether, in fact, the Trump campaign for the rest of the period from now to the election will try to appeal to different groups of people, and many people are pointing in the last several days to Trump's efforts over the last week to make a significant appeal to African Americans and even Hispanics as a way to grow the constituency. I would ask you to think about the following. This kind of expanded constituency for the purposes of winning the election is not the thinking that Stephen K. Bannon has practiced. Bannon's inclination is to strengthen the constituency that currently exists, rather than try to find ways to bring new people into it. The idea being that the commitment to this constituency ought to be foolproof and firm. Consequently, I think we'd be on strong, secure footing if we said that Bannon's career, recent career, and Breitbart's recent career has been based on continuing to appeal to the same group of people over and over again in order to strengthen it, to weld it even tighter to the message, to the ideology and the philosophy which drives what the pundits are calling the alt-right, the alternative right, and not to expand it. In fact, Bannon, when asked about Trump's apparent appeal to African Americans, and you'll recall, I have the particular document that speaks to this. You'll recall that last week, Donald Trump began this outreach the same day that he announced the appointment of Bannon and Kellyanne Conway to head up his campaign. That evening, he gave a speech in Milwaukee, and in it, he began what has since then become a consistent appeal to African Americans. And many of you, I'm sure, have seen this in the media, have seen it on television. It's been played several times, where Trump makes the point. Most of you don't have good jobs. Your schools are lousy. Your communities are full of crime. He even made the point in one, more dangerous in your communities than in some of the parts of the world where we're at war. And then Trump closes that appeal by saying to African Americans, what the hell do you have to lose by trying something different and giving me a chance? When he first made that appeal in the Milwaukee speech, the immediate reaction of the media was negative. Most people were saying, well, Trump shot himself in the foot again. Who's going to appeal? Who's going to follow or fall for an appeal like that? Like, you guys have no hope. There's nothing left for you except me. And the predictions were that initially the predictions were that African Americans would resent it and that Trump's appeal would never work. But in recent days, more and more people are coming around to the reality that there's something quite infectious about Trump's appeal. Because the irony is, in terms of logic, common sense, what he says to many people makes a lot of sense. He's pointing out that you have supported the Democrats forever and ever and ever, and what have they done for you? You don't have jobs. Your schools are terrible. Da-da-da-da. What do you have to lose to give me a chance, is what he's saying. And the fact of the matter is, he's saying what nobody else would ever say to this constituency. It's unclear that it's going to be a success, but it's also unclear that it's going to be a failure. I think that the jury's out on this at this early point as to whether this appeal is going to work. But the irony is, what has Trump got to lose? Because the polls are indicating that he has zero support among African Americans going into the campaign. At least that's what the polls indicate. So from his point of view, he has nothing to lose. My point here, and the point I'd like to make, was asked about Trump's appeal to African Americans. Bannon's reaction was very interesting. He didn't necessarily out and out endorse it, but what he did was characterize it as really shrewd. Think about this. Trump's outreach efforts to African American and even Hispanics is shrewd. I ask you to put your thinking caps on for a moment. Put yourself in Bannon's position. Put yourself in Trump's position. And try to walk in his shoes, those shoes, for a moment. If you were Donald Trump or you were Stephen Bannon and you were heading up Trump's campaign, what kind of situation would lead you to say that Trump's appeal to African Americans is shrewd? In what way? That it's going to work? I doubt that. I doubt that they're naive enough to believe that he's going to go from zero support among African Americans to something significant. Could happen, but likely won't happen. And as shrewd as these guys are, I doubt very much whether they would believe it anyway. So then the question is, in what way could Trump's outreach to African Americans be defined as shrewd by Bannon? And the only answer that makes sense is in its appeal not to African Americans, but to current constituents who support them. Whites. The white constituency that is really the heart of the Trump campaign. To them, for them, this appeal to African Americans can be considered shrewd because it gives them racial cover for supporting Trump. It's clear, it's understandable that some whites who would vote for Trump or who would support Trump are reluctant to do it because of the racial implications of that support. The fact that Trump doesn't appeal to African Americans or Hispanics or foreigners or women. In other words, the fact that Trump's campaign is so clearly defined around one particular constituency would bother some potential white supporters, to the point that they would say to themselves, hell, if I openly support Donald Trump, people are going to think I'm racist. I'm going to be accused of being a racist. So therefore, even if I support Donald Trump and plant the vote for him, I'm not going to admit that. I'm not going to share that with pollsters or with people who ask me. In fact, if they ask me, I'll out and out lie and say I'm going to vote for Hillary. And the research indicates that there's a lot of this. How much, we don't know, and it's probably going to take the election on November 8th to find out. Back to the issue of Shrewd. By focusing an appeal to African Americans and Hispanics, what Donald Trump has done is provide psychological cover for these people. He's making it more comfortable for whites to more openly support his candidacy, because he's given them protection from being called a racist. All they need to say is, what do you mean I'm a racist? Donald Trump himself, for the last week, has been making concerted appeals in his speeches at his rallies to African Americans and improving their communities. In the Milwaukee speech, for example, Trump said, quote, "Law and order must be restored. It must be restored for the sake of all, but most especially for the sake of those living in the affected communities. The main victims of these riots are law-abiding African American citizens living in these neighborhoods. It is their jobs, their homes, their schools, and communities which will suffer as a result." So what Trump is doing is making an appeal which makes his campaign look less racist, thereby provides cover for white constituents. And Bannon could say, this is shrewd. That's a good move. Fact of the matter is, that is exactly what Bannon said. Good move, Donald. There's so much to this campaign that it seems to provide an endless stream of news, headlines, and conversation. But here at the Virtual Center, I want to try as frequently as I can to bring it back to the issue of America's two-party system. In a pluralistic society like ours, with a multiplicity of different religious groups, denominations, a large number of Americans who are not affiliated with any particular religious denomination, a growing constituency in this country of people who don't regularly go to church or worship of any kind, and yet still consider themselves spiritual, still consider themselves God-fearing, moral people. In a divided society, a pluralistic society like ours, where citizens come from and originate from all different parts of the world, different nationalities, different cultures, different languages, as well as different religions. The only way that you can preserve a society at all is to govern it principally by focusing on the issues which unite it, not the issues which potentially divide it, because there are too many of those. Government's job in a republic like this one has to be to overcome the diversity, not become victim to it. And that's what we're seeing happen in this election as never before. It started, we could say it began with the Tea Party. And of course, historically, you could go back and say it began further than that. You could all the way back to know-nothingism and all of that in the middle of the 19th century. But the fact of the matter is, the only outlet for this kind of focused, faction-based politics in our society has been third parties. And one of the things that we've seen throughout the nation's history is a sequence of third-party movements. Some of them quite minor, some of them fairly significant. Historians used to focus on the populist movement of the late 19th and early 20th centuries as perhaps the most successful third-party movement in the country's history. But the fact of the matter is, because this society, this political system, was based on unifying factors which would offset or counter the divisive tendencies that existed within this society, the only ones who could win national elections were moderates. The nature of the two-party system, in order to be competitive, required that they appeal to the center, to middle of the road, that they make their appeal general enough that it doesn't just appeal to people to the left of center or to the right of center, but it's so focused on center that it can attract supporters from both sides of center, conservative-leaning people as well as liberal-leaning people. That has been where the majority resides in our political system. That's where elections are won. Campaigns based on platforms or issues which are too one-sided, too liberal or too conservative in our system have never been able to win. So the fact of the matter is, if you add up all the numbers behind the Trump campaign and the constituency which supports it, the numbers don't add up to a Trump victory. I think the other day the number that I threw out was about 40%. If Trump only gets the votes of the constituency to which he's appealing, that's about 40% of the vote, which means that the election will be an overwhelming victory for Democrats. But the fact of the matter is there's so much opposition to both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton that there are third parties in this election. The Green Party, the Libertarian Party. And the polls are telling us that as much as 15% of the electorate is probably going to vote for one or the other of these third parties. And every vote for them is a vote lost for the major parties. So that's going to reduce the gap between Democrats and Republicans. That makes Trump's challenge a little bit more manageable. From his perspective, they don't have to vote for him, they just have to not vote for Hillary. And so his campaign, potentially, and it hasn't quite begun yet, he won't do it, is to pillory Hillary. and not let up. Because the more Americans there are who are totally disenchanted with both campaigns, both major candidates, are liable to either not vote at all for president or vote for one of the third parties. We know what the impact of Ralph Nader's campaign was in 2000. Most people conclude that it cost Al Gore the White House. The Nader vote, taken out of the equation, most of it assumingly would have been a vote for Al Gore, meant that the election result was close enough that the Supreme Court could make the decision, and the Supreme Court, controlled by a 5-4 majority of conservatives, made that decision and handed the presidency to George W. Bush. Most people believed that if Nader hadn't been in it, Gore would have won it. So from Trump's perspective, he doesn't need to get these people to vote for him. He just needs to make sure they don't vote for Hillary. Under the circumstances, that's really the best way that he stands a chance. If he can get out his constituency, his full constituency, and get a maximum turnout in his favor, and discourage other people to not vote, that seems to be his best chance. But the fact of the matter is, and I don't want to keep pushing this, but the fact of the matter is, there's absolutely no question that the Republican Party, as we know it, is not going to survive this. One of the most astounding statements that I've seen in my reading is a statement made by Stephen Bannon on the radio program on Breitbart News. Actually, it was this month, but it was early in August, before he was appointed or asked to head up Trump's campaign. At this time, Bannon was heading up Breitbart, and Paul Manafort was heading up Trump's campaign, and all that changed within the last week or so, as we know. The question that came up on this radio program dealt with Breitbart and Fox News. Dealt with the issue of what's going on with Fox News and what the future seemed to hold for Breitbart, for the alt-right, for the alternative right that Breitbart appealed to. In that interview, Bannon compared the rivalry between Breitbart and Fox News to the Peloponnesian War. And this is what he said. The incumbent Athenians, that would be Fox News, the incumbent Athenians might as well know that the Spartans are coming for them. And there's not a damn thing they can do about it. Indeed, more Spartans are joining us every day, unquote. The significance of that Bannon statement suggests that Bannon is envisioning a media challenge to Fox News. And then a couple of weeks after he makes this statement, he's asked to head up Donald Trump's campaign. And accepts it. Accepts that appointment, that opportunity. What does the addition of Donald Trump at the head of the campaign mean for Breitbart? In other words, let's look at this from the other direction, from a different direction. Instead of asking ourselves what Breitbart and what Bannon might do or not do for the Trump campaign, let's turn it around. What can Trump do as Republican candidate for president of the United States for Breitbart in its war against Fox News? That might explain, at least in part, in this media struggle with Fox News. We ought to leave this. The significance of this particular story would seem to add credibility to the media war idea that we threw out there as a possibility on Monday. One of the things that I've noted is a number of conversations I'm picking up now on different talk shows and panel shows are seriously buying into this idea that maybe Donald Trump is thinking beyond the election. And maybe for him, the real issue is the media empire that he could head up by overcoming the conservative dominance of Fox News. Because we know Fox News is hurting right now because of these sexual harassment issues. Yet another Fox female reporter or hostess came out this week with stories about sexual harassment and named names. Bill O'Reilly's name came up in one of her comments. And so also did Scott Brown, the former Republican senator from Massachusetts, who, if you remember, ran on the Republican ticket in New Hampshire and lost. Many people thought that Scott Brown would be one of the people that Trump would seriously look at as a vice presidential running mate. Anyway, his name has come up in the sexual harassment thing with Fox News as well. So the fact of the matter is Fox News is hurting right now. Ailes is gone. And Bannon's read on what's going on with Fox News is that Fox believes that it's being too conservative and it's trying to moderate its positions a little bit in order to appeal to more people. And from Bannon's perspective, that does nothing but enhance the appeal of Breitbart to strict Tea Party type, alt-right type Republicans, conservatives. And so many people are beginning to take seriously the speculation that this might be Donald Trump's ultimate game plan, because he is an empire builder and he's a businessman. He's not a politician. He says that many times. We threw out the possibility the other day that maybe Donald Trump's goal then, or focus, is not so much on the election on November 8th as to the media empire that he might be able to build after it. At this point, that's only speculation. But this story about the Peloponnesian War between Breitbart and Fox News from Stephen K. Bannon suggests that while it's speculation with Donald Trump, it is not speculation as far as Bannon goes. There's absolutely no question then that this is in Bannon's headlights, if you will. This is part of Bannon's master plan. Whether it's also Trump's, we don't know that for sure. but clearly we'll find out. I think that the entire story is fascinating. There are so many ins and outs and directions to this, and to think on the 26th of September, there's going to be a debate between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. There's no question that that's going to be the media event of all time. It's going to be the equivalent of a cage fight. Because it's hard to envision both of these people leaving at the end of the debate on their feet. There's no way in the world that the public is not going to relish this. It's the media event of media events. We've just gone beyond the top of the hour. We're at 1 minute after 2 in the East. So I think it's a good time here to pause for our 5-minute break. And then we'll be right back. And as I mentioned, there are a couple of other things I'd like to deal with, and one of them is Kohlberg. And if time runs out on us, then what I'll do, is at least introduce the Kohlberg idea, and then we can pick up on it when we get back together again here at the Virtual Center next Monday. But for right now, let's pause and take our 5-minute break. You're listening to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. We're going to pause for a 5-minute break, and we'll be right back. I hope that you can stay with us. Thank you. Thank you, Agnes, and welcome to our second hour here at the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Again, I remind you, today is Wednesday, the 24th day of August in the year 2016. Some of you may wonder why I give the date at the beginning of each hour. And the reason I do that is because of the archived issue. That by giving the date, if people do at a later time find themselves going after a particular program and they identify it by date, then I try to give the date at the beginning of the hour so people will be able to tell right away that, yes, this is the program you want, or yes, this is not the program you want. You need to keep searching. But anyway, that's one of the reasons I do it. I don't know whether it's not. Let me again share with you our phone number and invite you to use it to share your thoughts, your concerns, or ideas with our other listeners. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. My email address, if you'd like to communicate one-on-one with me that way, my address is waobrien906 at gmail.com. That's waobrien, OBRIEN 906 at gmail.com. And again, I do call your attention to our Facebook page. I try to post issues, things that I write about on the Facebook page if they seem appropriate. And likewise, I try to share links with our listeners that I believe are links to articles that would be well worth their checking on. And so basically, that's really the purpose of our Facebook page. If you go to Facebook, if you're a regular user of Facebook, you know this. If you go to facebook.com, you'll be on the homepage. And if you go to the search box at the top and type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, you will be into our Facebook page. And there are a number of postings there, and they are all in order, the most recent first. And so the one that I put on there yesterday is the first one that you'll come to. And they go down regressively after that. And each of them is designed or intended to elicit reaction or comment or likes, dislikes, reasons for, suggestions to improve, something like that. So I do value and solicit your comments or your reactions to these postings. And you can do it on Facebook, or you can do it here by dropping me an email, or by picking up the phone and calling our our talk line at 304-663-4676. There's one additional issue. We were talking obviously about the Trump campaign and what the impact might be on the Republican Party after November. And we were talking about the connection and the linkage between Breitbart and Stephen Bannon and Donald Trump, and about the perspective or the possibility of the media outreach effort that seems at least likely to be a factor, at least with Bannon, because within the month he has basically said that he saw himself as head of Breitbart as in a media war, what he called a version of the Peloponnesian War with Fox News. Obviously, in that war, he was equating Fox with the Athenians in power, and he was equating his own Breitbart network with the Spartans. I think that's really an interesting analogy. If you're going to focus on the Peloponnesian War as your example between the Athenians and the Spartans, it would stand to reason that Breitbart would represent the Spartans because of the very militaristic, aggressive philosophy which seemed to govern the Spartan city-state in ancient Greece. So I think the analogy with Spartans, Bannon's analogy with Spartans, is appropriate. There's one other issue that I'd like to just mention briefly on that particular issue, and I haven't as yet, although in one case I'm definitely seriously considering getting my hands on this particular book. There are two books that have come out recently that really address this particular issue, or the nature of the constituency, the Breitbart constituency, which has become the Trump constituency. And if you'd like a review of it, not too long ago in the Washington Post, Fareed Zakaria, many of you have seen him on CNN, Fareed Zakaria, on August 18th, which is 6 days ago, wrote a piece in the Washington Post which really was a review of a new book by J.D. Vance. And the title of this book is Hillbilly Elegy, a memoir of a family and a culture in crisis. It is a book devoted to an analysis of this particular white constituency that we've been talking so much about. Zakaria's piece ends up being somewhat critical, a little bit critical of Vance, because Zakaria doesn't believe that Vance assigns race its appropriate weight in this particular struggle. And he is particularly committed to the idea that Vance dodges a bullet by downplaying the issue of race. And when you get into President Obama specifically and the hostility toward Obama that exists in this constituency, while they claim that their opposition to Obama is because he's clean, perfect, and neutral, his urban background, his success in the meritocracy, his reliability as a father and a husband, all these things, Zakaria says, are mentioned by Vance, but not the fact that Obama is black. And Zakaria believes that balance and accuracy would indicate that this needs to be recognized and that this is a deficiency in Vance's book. But the fact of the matter is, as Zakaria says, Vance gets underneath the data and shows us what these impersonal forces mean to actual people. He describes the abandoned children, the poor work habits, the drug abuse, the violence, the rage. But, as Zakaria says, he does it with love and sympathy. These are his own family, after all. He's from this particular group. And Vance makes the point in his book. We hillbillies must wake the hell up, he says, and stop blaming Obama or Bush or faceless companies and ask ourselves what we can do to make things better. Vance's book is getting a lot of attention. It's near the top of the bestseller lists. And it's on this particular group. And it seems to me that it would be worth a read for those who want to pursue this particular issue even further. And there's a second book that just came out within the week. And its author is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the retired NBA star. And I've seen him interviewed twice within this week on his book called Writing on the Wall. In that book, Jabbar is talking about the very things we've talked about today, namely the intent of the founders and the extent to which the nature of the republic as we know it is in jeopardy. And one of the things that he commented upon in response to a question was about the issue of race. Jabbar says that he believes that this movement towards integration that was so big in the 60s and 70s actually went a little bit further. People began to actually believe that the ideal or the goal was for people to become unaware of race. The fact of the matter is, Jabbar said, race is there. And throughout history, people have always considered themselves different from people who didn't look like them or talk like them. To assume that we're going to be able to overcome that, Jabbar says, is crazy. But the fact of the matter is we are in this together and we can coexist and live together and we can end the discrimination and the racism that exists. But we're never going to eliminate race as a factor. It's an issue we've got to learn to deal with constructively. This is a particular book, just on the comments that he's made, that leads me to believe that it's one I want to take a look at. And so I feel that I would be dishonest and remiss if I didn't at least acknowledge this book, because it seems to fit into what we've been talking about so well. As I mentioned, there is another issue. Actually, there are two issues that I'd like to at least make reference to before we get into the Kohlberg story. The first one I didn't mention earlier, but I'll mention now. Some of you may have noticed in the media that tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern Time is a teleconference that's going to feature Bernie Sanders. And this particular teleconference, is intended to kick off a movement based on the Sanders campaign. The title of the title of the operation or the group is Our Revolution. And all over the country, Sanders supporters are going to be tuned in to this particular teleconference. And the idea is Sanders is going to address the importance of this group keeping the revolution alive that he felt he began during his campaign. I'm scheduled to attend one of these group meetings tonight, and I plan to do that. I'm kind of looking forward to it. But at the same time, I've already picked up a number of significant defections from this movement. as some people, the Bernie or nobody group, the people that was so committed to Bernie Sanders that they were unwilling to make the switch to Hillary Clinton, and they resent the fact that Sanders made that move and urged his followers to support Hillary. A number of people have defected as a result of this particular issue. Another reason for the defections is that Bernie Sanders asked Jeff Weaver, his campaign manager, to head up this Our Revolution movement. And many Sanders supporters believed that as much as anything else, Jeff Weaver is in part responsible for Bernie's inability to secure the Democratic nomination. I mean, you know, we know there are other issues that charge that the system was rigged and all the rest of it. But many people believe that if Sanders had had somebody other than Jeff Weaver to head up the organization, you know, to head up his campaign, that Sanders probably would have had a better chance. And the fact that now Sanders has asked Weaver to head up this Our Revolution movement has caused a number of people, prominent people, to bail out of the movement. And the third thing that seems to be causing the defections is the registration with the IRS of the Our Revolution organization as a 501c4 organization. A 501c4, most of the time we hear 501c3s. And we know that 501c3s are considered to be community-focused humanitarian efforts that are apolitical, that aren't lining up behind one particular group, political group or another. A 501c4 organization, however, opens up the possibility of major contributors making major financial contributions to the effort, to the organization. And some people who have defected believe that this classifying the group as a 501c4 is hypocritical on Bernie's part. Bernie's whole campaign, they feel, was based on challenging big money in politics. And now this particular organization is registered as a potential recipient of big donations. Many people feel that this is hypocritical on Bernie's parts. And there's actually a fourth thing, but this one I particularly take issue with. There are some people that were upset recently because the media pointed out or shared with us that Bernie Sanders and his wife have recently purchased a $600,000 home in Vermont, very close to Lake Champlain. And some people feel that Bernie is sold out. And I guess they probably would have felt much better if Bernie lived in a one-room apartment in a basement somewhere. I'm being facetious, of course. Many people feel that buying a $600,000 home was pretty much an indication that Bernie has pretty well sold out on the movement he headed. Fact of the matter is, I'm not really sure of that, because very honestly, to buy a home near Lake Champlain, $600,000 is not Trump Towers by any stretch. I think some people are implying that it is. It is not. Housing costs in Vermont are very high. Housing costs in all New England are extremely high. I've known people that have been offered teaching jobs in New England and have had to turn them down because they couldn't find a place that they could afford to buy or rent because their jobs didn't pay enough. It costs a tremendous amount of money to move into New England from elsewhere. I grew up in Boston. I know that this is true. The people I know there are people who have lived in Boston for generations. And the place they live in is a home or an apartment that they inherited. Most of them couldn't afford to buy into this from outside now. And so the fact that Bernie Sanders paid $600,000 for a home in Vermont, especially one close to Lake Champlain, is not anything that bothers me. I mean, I'm glad for him, but I'm also envious. I would love to have a nice home on Lake Champlain in Vermont also. $600,000 would be beyond my income for sure. But after all, Bernie is a member of the United States Senate. And so I think it's a little bit unfair to expect that Bernie would take a lifelong commitment to poverty, and become a Franciscan or something, or a Jesuit, in order to be consistent to the movement he headed. I think that's asking an awful lot. But anyway, I plan to go to this meeting tonight, and I'm very interested to see what will happen. And of course, again, I am a candidate here in West Virginia for this fall's election to the legislature. I have embraced the platform of the Democratic Party here in West Virginia because it's based on Bernie Sanders' program. So basically, I have embraced this platform or this program. And that's the reason I'm going. Because it appears that this group is intended to do that as well. So consequently, I belong there, I feel. And so I will be there this evening, and I will share with you, if, depending on what happens, I will share with you what I pick up in a future program. That's the first thing I wanted to deal with. The second thing, as I mentioned on Monday, was the issue of the Article 5 convention and the fact that West Virginia's buying in to the balanced budget amendment made West Virginia the 28th state to support a resolution for an Article 5 convention to adopt a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution of the United States, and that only left 6 more states in order to reach the magic 2/3, the 34 states necessary to require Congress to call such a convention. And it's important to keep in mind that under Article 5, Congress does not have the option of not calling a convention if 2/3 of the states request it. Article 5 says that Congress, upon the petition or the request of 2/3 of the states, shall convene such a convention. After the program on Monday, I took to doing a little bit of research on the West Virginia vote. And I with you because I didn't do this before. The particular piece of legislation that West Virginia approved on the 12th of March of this year, as about a week before the West Virginia legislative session ended, the regular session. At that time we didn't know, but there was going to be a special session to follow because the Republican majority in our legislature was unable to pass a budget. And the only thing that the legislature is mandated to do in its 60-day session is to pass a budget. And this legislature didn't do it. And I think it's a major failing of the new majority in there. It's not the only failing, but clearly it's an important one. While the resolution endorsing a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution of the United States ultimately received approval from both houses of the West Virginia legislature, The fact of the matter is there was a little bit of discord between Senate and House prior to the final vote. It just so happens that in West Virginia, the House, in its bill, 2424 is the House bill number, adopted the resolution in February. The Senate, however, adopted a resolution which was much different than the House. The Senate adopted the approach which we shared on Monday's program, was the Convention of States idea. That was a convention to consider a number of amendments designed to weaken the power and influence of the federal government, unquote. That was adopted here by the West Virginia Senate in late February, on the 26th of February. It was adopted by a straight party vote. 18 Republicans for it, 14 Democrats opposed to it. 2 Democrats were absent. The vote, if the 2 Democrats were there, presumably they would have voted with other Democrats. The vote would have been, if the full complement of senators was there, 18-16. And that indeed is the number of seats in the West Virginia Senate, 34. So in a sense, what we have here is a straight party vote. The fact of the matter is, the Republicans, while they do have a majority in the House, a significant majority in the House, do not have the kind of strength that made it possible to get that vote through the House. So at the end of the day, the Senate was forced to concede its resolution and to buy into the House resolution, and that's the one that passed. What particularly interests me as a candidate is that my opponent is one of the people that supported this bill. And what I am aware of, and this is what I'm sharing with you, is that while many people have criticized the behavior and the lack of reputable action and representation that occurred in this session of the West Virginia legislature, and while there are many criticisms of what the Republican majority was able to do, pass right to work, abolish prevailing wage, debate and try to pass the same kind of religious restoration freedom bill that is creating such a consternation in North Carolina, it caused the NBA to move its All-Star game out of North Carolina for next year because of this legislation. Essentially the same bill, the idea opposing transgender bathrooms and all the rest of it, was debated here in West Virginia, and at the 11th hour was defeated. And what defeated it was the allegation that it made discrimination against gays and lesbians likely here in West Virginia. It created religious cover, First Amendment protections for people who did not want to serve same-sex marriage situations. And because it was potentially discriminatory, Democratic opposition to the bill ultimately sank it. But to be very honest with you, more sank it than that. Many of the original sponsors of the bill ended up voting against it at the end because an amendment to the bill was made by a Democrat making discrimination under this particular legislation impossible. The amendment would specifically forbid any discrimination, recognizing that the law as written made the potential for discrimination a reality. So the amendment was designed to address the potential and say under no circumstances is anyone empowered by this legislation to use religious freedom in the First Amendment as the basis for not serving same-sex couples. And many of the original sponsors of the bill, once that amendment passed, abandoned the bill and voted against it. So at the 11th hour, it was defeated. And the question, of course, is, did they vote against it because the amendment made discrimination impossible under it? If that's true, then that makes the sponsors and supporters of the bill look even worse. But the fact of the matter is the legislature took so much of its time debating legislation like that, and the one that's getting all the attention in the media is a what is called a raw milk bill, which makes it lawful for farmers to market raw milk without going through the required homogenization and pasteurization procedure. And they debated that for quite a while and passed it. And a lot of the criticism directed at the legislature is based on wasting time on legislation like this, and then not doing its constitutional duty by approving a budget. The reason I was interested in this and did this background research is because of all the opposition being leveled against the new Republican majority in the West Virginia legislature. And I'm running against that majority. I mean, it's very clear. Is the fact that this House Bill 2424, which makes West Virginia the 28th state to sign on to the movement for an Article 5 constitutional convention, is hardly ever mentioned. This one clearly is flying under the radar. And after our program Monday, I've pretty much decided that I'm going to make a major feature of this particular piece of legislation, because I don't think most people even know that House Bill 2424 even passed, or what it really means. And of course, the fact of the matter is those who do know about it likely supported it because they support the idea of a balanced budget amendment. We talked about how popular that particular legislation is. So by focusing the resolution for the convention on a balanced budget amendment, it created a situation where even some Democrats were willing to support it because they liked the idea of a balanced budget amendment. I don't, but I understand why they do. I think that this is potentially the very worst move that the new Republican majority in our legislature made. And the fact that it's not getting any attention at all seems to me to be an error that I want to be quick to address. What I find interesting, and I don't know how many people are aware of this, that's what I'm going to spend my campaign focusing on, is that much of this legislation, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, the end to prevailing wage, the successful right to work legislation that did pass the legislature, the commitment by a number of Republicans here in West Virginia, 26 members of our legislative majority, signed on to the Grover Norquist pledge to not raise taxes under any circumstances, ever. And what that meant was that at the end of the day, at the 11th hour, when the West Virginia legislature was looking to pass a budget, these people would not allow a tax increase to be part of the solution. And as much as anything else, that drove the whole operation into special session. And while there was some press coverage of this no tax commitment by a number of members of our legislature, most of them Republican, the fact of the matter is, this also was the result of legislation drafted not in the West Virginia legislature, but as part of the American Legislative Exchange Council agenda, the Koch-funded group that is drafting prospective pieces of legislation and farming them out to Republican majorities in numerous states that Republicans control throughout the nation. This was not a West Virginia bill. The Right to Work bill was almost exactly the same as the Right to Work bill that was approved in Wisconsin. And opponents of it have been successful in Wisconsin in getting a judge to issue an injunction against it. Here in West Virginia, opponents of Right to Work have done the same thing. But the fact of the matter is, what that's going to do is put the final decision in the hands of the state Supreme Court, which in both states are controlled by Republicans. So while the opponents of Right to Work here in West Virginia and in Wisconsin may have won the battle, it's not clear that they're going to be able to win the war. My point is that much of this legislation that took up legislative time to be debated originated from outside the state by special interests and was imported into the state and then run through the legislature because of the Republican majority that now exists there. And the fact that the Senate resolution, which got a 100% vote of support from Republican senators, was a bill drafted by ALEC, by the American Legislative Exchange Council, indicates to me that to say that the Republican majority in the West Virginia legislature all sing from the same hymn book is an understatement. These people vote in lockstep. And what that means is they are not allowing the citizens of West Virginia to have any meaningful input into the legislative process that makes it to the floor of the West Virginia legislature. These people are taking their marching orders but from ALEC, from out-of-state special interests, not from the citizens of West Virginia. To me, that is the most important argument, the most important issue in this entire discussion, is the lockstep nature of Republican voting. We've seen it in Washington. We saw it happen with the shutdown, the government shutdown, and the threatened shutdowns that followed. We've seen it happen over and over again on pieces of legislation favored by the Obama administration. We have seen a legislature that has been in session, it's now on summer recess, that hasn't really done anything since it was sworn in at the beginning of this legislative year. Now we're seeing it in Republican-controlled state legislatures, which to me suggests that the Republican agenda is being written outside this state. It's being written specifically by special interests for special interests. And what this means is, this is what is driving the call for an Article 5 convention. And it's got to be stopped. As a candidate, the case that I have to make to these voters in my constituency is that their elected representatives are not representing them. They are taking their marching orders from special interests outside the state, from the Grover Norquists and the American Tax Reform Group, from the American Legislative Exchange Council. The legislature, one after the other, is adopting the same legislation. They're verbatim the same because they're all drafted from the same place, and it's not within that state legislature. And voters need to know this and need to be aware of what this means in terms of amending the Constitution of the United States. These people have an agenda. Obviously, they have an agenda. And this Article 5 convention would give them an opportunity to implement that agenda. And even if it is just limited to the balanced budget amendment, what that means is the federal government would no longer be able to use its power to tax to affect the economy, to increase spending during times of recession, to raise taxes in order to slow down inflation in a vibrant economy. The only leverage that government has in an economy to respond to things like Hurricane Katrina and to the floods and wildfires and all the rest of it that we're seeing is its taxing power and its ability to govern, if need be, in debt. By denying government this option, you are denying government the opportunity to define and respond to the public interest. You are making it impossible for government to govern. And you are turning over the reins of power in this country to these special interests. People need to know that. Somehow, I've got to find a way to tell them. And I've got to do it in a way which is not so complicated that they won't understand it. That would be more harmful than anything else. This isn't easy, but it's why I'm running. When I embraced the Sanders platform here in West Virginia, I did so advisedly. It's not that I'm comfortable with every item in that platform. That's not the point. The point is that every item in that platform is people-oriented, is people-oriented, not institution-oriented. It is not corporations. It is not businesses. It is not entrepreneurs. It is not speculators. It is not investors that dominate or drive this particular platform. It's the needs of people. And for the first time, this platform puts government on the side of people rather than corporations. and I support it. And that's why I'm going to the Sanders meeting this evening. I think this is incredibly, incredibly important. Kind of ironic, kind of funny, except it's not funny, how all of these things seem to come together at the end in the 11th hour. The Article 5 convention, the efforts of the American Legislative Exchange Council, the injection of big money into our campaigns, the Citizens United decision, the Heller decision on the Second Amendment that Scalia so artfully was able to get through a 5-4 conservative-dominated Supreme Court. So that now, what we hear Republicans saying all the time is that, like Obama, Hillary will take away your guns. Donald Trump says over and over again, Hillary wants to take away the Second Amendment. The implications of that statement is that the Second Amendment right to bear arms was in the initial Bill of Rights. By looking at the Heller decision and the judicial antics that Justice Scalia played in order to reverse the Second Amendment, in order to reach the right to bear arms decision that he reached in that decision. What we saw was a classic case of judicial activism on the part of conservatives. The one thing more than anything else that conservatives have consistently criticized liberals for, judicial activism. The inclination of courts to make law rather than just interpret law. Justice Scalia made law in Heller because he manipulated the Second Amendment in order to make it a right to bear arms amendment. It was not such an amendment. The founders didn't intend it to be such an amendment. Saul Cornell told us in his research that governments regularly, before the Second Amendment and after the Second Amendment, state and local governments regularly regulated arms. The right to bear arms is not a natural right that falls under the unalienable rights of the Declaration of Independence. But Justice Scalia manipulated into a position where the Donald Trumps of the world could claim that it was that. And it is not. There's a lot going on, it seems to me, that makes the virtual center and its mission relevant. I think today, an awful lot of it has come together. This campaign, this election, is bringing a lot of it to the fore and is making the links and the connections more and more obvious. I hope that I was able today to successfully make some of these points. I look to your reaction and your response. And I will look forward to hearing from you, either via email or on Facebook, or indeed in a phone call or two in our programming next week. It is 53 minutes after the hour. We have probably 5 minutes left in our program today, which means that we're not going to get very far on Lawrence Kohlberg's stages of moral development. But let me at least lay out a scenario which I believe makes consideration of Lawrence Kohlberg's research significant. Not that long ago here at the Virtual Center, several weeks ago, a couple of months ago, we spent quite a bit of time on Jefferson's Declaration of Independence. More specifically, we spent quite a bit of time on Jefferson's commitment to the ideas associated with the Scottish Enlightenment, particularly the idea of a moral sense that guided human behavior. We concluded, I believe, that Jefferson was committed to the idea that within every human being there is this moral sense which is intended and directed to guiding human behavior. We call it operating from your gut, doing what you feel is right, because what the moral sense means is innately knowing the difference between right and wrong and good and bad. When we come to the issue of morality, of making decisions, moral decisions, it seems to me we're in a different league. We're into a different area. Because what Kohlberg and other researchers are talking about when they talk about making decisions that are moral, that are based on a process of moral reasoning, cognitive thinking, critical thinking, we're talking about decisions that emanate from the mind, from the brain, not so much from the heart. Basically, what Kohlberg is talking about is so educating the brain that it can work in tandem with what Jefferson called the moral sense that is within every one of us. Because we know that the traditional view of human nature that the founders took, that was in the Constitution of the United States, that the nature of factions was sown into the nature of man, that man was innately self-interested and that self-interest would always dominate his behavior. We know that our constitutional system is based on that assumption. Kohlberg is giving us a methodology to develop a cognitive ability to counter that kind of logical, rational thinking. In other words, a way to minimize self-interest in the interests of morality and justice. That is why this is so significant to what we're about here at the Virtual Center. Unfortunately, however, we've run out of time. We're at 58 minutes after the hour. We're at obviously the end of our program today, but as it turns out, we're also at the end of our programming for the week. And we will not be back together again until 1 p.m. Eastern Time next Monday. And next Monday, as many of you know, is will be the 29th day of August. Right now, I would like to address Kohlberg's stages of moral development as the major focus of that particular program next week, the first program. All of that, of course, is somewhat speculative because we don't know the kinds of things that might happen between now and next Monday. I want to make sure that the program remains relevant, and I'll do my very best to make sure that it does. I want to thank you for listening today. I want to encourage you to join us again as we present the future programs here at the Virtual Center. Thank you so very, very much for your participation. I hope you have a great evening and a great weekend. And remember, be kind to each other. And tell your friends about the Virtual Center. I think if they're your friends, they'll get a lot out of it. Thank you very much. I appreciate everything you do. Thank you.